Let's talk about YCS Indie. The fact that this says Snake Eyes only is not a duplication glitch or anything like that. That's just what the format is right now. Normally, this would be where we go and take a look at YCS results and maybe take a look at a bunch of different decks that are interesting. However, this is what we're being presented with. This is also something that I don't want to say surprised me, but it did surprise me to an extent. If you've listened to the last episode of the podcast, which was recorded before this YCS but released after this YCS, which aged extremely poorly because in that podcast we talked about the format, and on a national/regional level, the Snake Eye deck actually has lost a little bit of popularity, or like it's still the most popular and most dominant deck, but not in these numbers. I had the impression that maybe the deck was a little bit more manageable, which obviously has been proven wrong. The situation is not that great, honestly, in terms of deck diversity right now. So if that's something you are looking for in a format, which I know a lot of people are, then I can understand why people are hating on this. Absolutely. Obviously, I don't want to take a look at a whole bunch of different Snake Eye decks, but this is the list that Paulo won with. I will say, just to bring something positive in this, I did watch Paulo's deck profile after the tournament has ended. As terrible as it may be to watch some of these hand trap back and forth games, Paulo still said a lot of things about his deck in his deck profile that made me think there are still a lot of good factors in this format and a lot of skill testing stuff that's happening. I will say, after having watched the entire YCS, I think watching Snake Eye Mirrors is definitely not as fun as it could be, right? You still have a lot of really good players making it to the top cut of these tournaments, and especially winning these tournaments recently, is even in Snake Eye format, has been a lot of skillful players. You know, I'm sure I'm forgetting some, but like Cameron Neal comes to mind, Christian Arena, who's won back-to-back, and Paulo now. So I think from a playing perspective, the format is probably fine. It's not insanely good, I don't think. It's not terrible either. I think another thing that needs to be talked about with Snake Eyes is two things. First of all, the general viewing experience of Snake Eyes. Let the game be as good as it wants. The games still need to be fun to watch as well, because that's a huge part. That's something I've realized, especially in the recent month, because I'm in the position of a viewer at the moment by force. We don't have YCSs in Europe, so I'm mostly spectating for American YCSs. That is something that I feel like is important, because a large part of the Yu-Gi-Oh community is spectating these events instead of playing them, right? Like YCS Indianapolis had 1,800 duelists roughly, but far more people watched it. And I think that is at least something to consider when it comes to like the top tier meta decks, is are they fun to watch? I don't know if that's the case for Snake Eye. At least I feel like the majority of the people in my chat were like not as happy with watching Snake Eye mirror match. The other big issue that I have with Snake Eye is simply the fact of how long it's taken. In terms of ban list design, something that should probably never happen is that something is the absolute best deck in the format, and then a ban list happens and it is still the absolute best deck in the format. I think it's completely fine not wanting to immediately kill a deck. That is reasonable and everything. They should have probably brought down Snake Eye a little bit. Maybe it would have even been okay if it was still like the most represented deck in Top Cut. Maybe if it was like 10 out of 32 and then the rest is a little more diverse or whatever. This is 21 in top 32 plus a Fire King Snake Eye plus a Salamangreat deck, which is basically a Snake Eye deck. I was happy with the last ban list because I think a lot of the hits were good. But the fact that they just left out the Snake Eye hits completely, I think, was a mistake. And I'm honestly curious to see what's going to happen moving into Euros and the NAWCQ. Because normally you wouldn't expect a new ban list just yet. And I don't want to turn this into a discussion of exactly what should happen. I'm going to leave that for a later date. But the NAWCQ and the European Championship are like the two biggest events of the year outside of the World Championship. People basically are working towards those continental championships because they are like the biggest major events in the TCG. And the same is true for the World's qualifying tournaments in other regions as well, like Latin America and so on and so forth. Those are like the most hype events of the year. And I feel like for those events to be the exact same format that we've had for the last months would be incredibly disappointing, also from a viewing perspective, right? Like, I don't think people would be as hyped for those tournaments as they could be. For me personally, even as a player, it'd be the same. Like, I wouldn't care even if they dropped the ban list like 2 weeks before and it was super little time to prepare or whatever. I still would think that it would be refreshing and cool if they did that. Another thing that is worth pointing out is that we have some set releases coming up. We have that Battles of Legends kind of set. I don't know exactly what it's called. And we have Infinite Forbidden before NAWCQ LWCQ and European Championship. Something that I feel like Konami has done in the past, which they might repeat. They just hope that a new set shakes up the meta enough so that they don't have to release a ban list, which is something that I'm personally not hoping for. In an ideal world, I think they would release a ban list a little bit sooner rather than later, maybe even before NAWCQ or European Championship. Realistically, I don't know if that's gonna happen. I have my doubts. That's my take on the Snake Eye situation. Another thing that is definitely worth bringing up is Tenpai's performance at a whopping 1 in top 32, which is definitely not the expected representation if you look at Tenpai's results in recent nationals and regional tournaments. It wasn't on par with Snake Eye, but it was like 30% Snake Eye, 30-something% Snake Eye, and then 20-something Tenpai, I think. Tenpai was like a close second in terms of representation. And I don't know exactly what caused this specific thing. I can only guess. I personally think a lot of the high caliber players are kind of drawn away from Tenpai. It's the same reason why I personally don't consider Tenpai for my nationals, is because I feel like Tenpai, it doesn't feel like it offers the skill expression that I would like in a deck. Maybe people just started preparing for Tenpai better, and therefore the people didn't get through Swiss, because I'm sure the deck was represented at the tournament. In top 8, there was only one non-Snake Eye deck, and that was Raymond Dai with Labyrinth, who was playing a interesting list, I think. Only using Nibiru and Infinite Impermanence, no Ash Blossom, no Effect Veil or nothing. Basically relying on, obviously, game 1 either going first or drawing Arias, Nibiru, or Impermanence, basically. High trap count. The absence of pot cards is something that we've seen in multiple recent Labyrinth lists. You basically want to have the maximum amount of traps in your deck because you have Backjack, right? And Backjack with a furniture is another way you can easily disrupt your opponent from going first by just having like Backjack hit Trap Trick or Punishment or Karma Cannon or whatever. So I think that's why we're keeping it as little spell cards as possible, basically, right? And so this deck, even though it might look like it only plays 6 hand traps, in reality you have Imperm, Nibiru, you have Arias plus Trap, you have Furniture plus Backjack, or you have Furniture plus Coup Clock, which are also kind of interruptions when you have to go second. This deck's interesting. I think it's got potential. I think one of Labyrinth's main advantages right now is the fact that a lot of the cards that people are using are not great against it, like Ghost Ogre and Snow Rabbit, Ghost Mourner, which is also only occasionally strong against it, Nibiru, even Effect Veiler sometimes isn't that good against it. A lot of cards that people are definitely playing, and some of your hand traps are not counterable by cards like Crossout Designator, which Crossout Designator is in pretty much any deck right now, and it's super scary to go up against if you're just relying on hand traps. So having something like Arias into a trap card that they cannot do a crossout on because they don't play that is nice. So I think Labyrinth is solid right now. And then the two biggest decks in Top Cut, which biggest is pretty much a stretch because it's just 2 copies of these decks, Pure Melodious and Runic Stun. Runic Stun has kind of taken the spot of the one anti-meta deck that somehow works. It's a matter of if people aren't prepared for it, then you're gonna lose. And the only thing that most people play against Runic Stun is Cosmic Cyclone. Very, very often, even drawing one Cosmic Cyclone might not be enough against these decks because they obviously might have multiple floodgates. As you can see, they're siding Cursed Seal of the Forbidden Spell to counter that Cosmic Cyclone, and if it's the only card that you play, then you can't do anything, right, for the rest of the game. It's just hard to prepare for decks like these because you need to be prepared for Snake Eyes, and you also need to be prepared for Tenpai, and you also want to be prepared against a bunch of other decks. I think the best answer, if you're looking for something specifically for Runic Stun, is probably Eldritch the Golden Lord. The good thing about Eldritch the Golden Lord is that you can reuse it every turn. You can out multiple skill drains, or there can be only ones or rivalries or whatever. It can't get Curse Seal of the Forbidden Spell because it's a monster. Hugin cannot protect from it because it's not a destruction effect. I think that is something to consider if you want to use a card specifically for Runic Stun. Statistically, it is the second most represented deck in Top Cut here, so I feel like it's warranted to prepare for it, but okay. Other notable decks, Melodious. I think both of these players were using very similar decks, but Pure Melodious is a deck that I personally thought was cool. It's a deck that I also personally consider for German nationals, but it's basically the same concept as most other decks in the format, where you just play some amount of hand traps and then pair it up with a relatively solid engine that has some one card combos. It's basically the same thing that, for example, Chimera is doing, or Voiceless Voice is doing, just in a different skin. And I mean, that's basically already it, right? We have one player top with Voiceless Voice. combos. We have one player up with Kashtira, which is a shifter deck, which is kind of the story of the format. There is skill that goes into building Snake Eye decks. I have personally, in preparation for German Nats, already taken some time to take a look at the different Snake Eye decks in top 32 at the YCS, and there are differences between them, and I do think Paulo's list was very well thought out. A lot of the tech card choices were really neat. There is skill in deck building. There's also skill in hand trap usage, using it in the correct spots, which is probably the reason why a lot of these well-known players and good players are making it to the top cuts of these tournaments. I think it's just a matter of, no matter if a format is actually good or bad in a lot of different ways, I think people just get tired of seeing the same stuff over and over again, especially if it involves this many hand traps and one card combos. I think it gets tiring faster than usual, I would think. As for me personally, I have German Nationals in 1.5 weeks. I haven't decided what I'm gonna play because I'm gonna be honest with you, everything that isn't Snake Eyes feels like I would be throwing. At the same time, I am tired of Snake Eyes, so I am thinking about playing something that I would enjoy more, but I'm not sure if I'm willing to. I don't know. Like I said, I've been considering Melodious, but I don't know if that's even that much different in terms of its playstyle. We'll see how it goes, but I personally can't wait for some meta shakeups. The OCG metagame was actually shaken up by Infinite Forbidden a little bit, so maybe that helps. Within all those decks that play one card combos and hand traps, Snake Eyes is just the one that has the most starters, the most extenders, and somehow still has room for the most hand traps. In all those aspects, it feels like Snake Eye is just the best. So it feels like if I'm playing Chimera, I'm playing the same concept as a deck. You're trying to do the same thing, but you just have worse odds of doing it. The problem with innovating in such a format is that you would need to find a deck that not only wins against like the absurd amount of hand traps that people are using, but also just is naturally good against Snake Eyes. It's tough. This is just an inherent problem of a ban list being released, start of the Nats season, and German Nats being in the end. It'll always be like that. I don't think so. I think if the last ban list had shaken up Snake Eyes a little bit more than it did, I think we'd be fine. I don't have a problem with a format lasting a couple months. That's fine, because there's always developments within a format. The problem with this format is specifically the main deck approach to Snake Eye didn't change at all, right? The only thing that changes is the end board that you would theoretically make if you would resolve your combo, but that rarely matters because it's a hand trap format, and most of the time you don't get to do the combos that you would do if you wouldn't get hand trapped. The cards in your extra deck that change don't actually matter. We're not really playing a new format since the last ban list. We're playing the same format as the couple months beforehand. Plus, yes, the Snake Eye Diabellstar card honestly had more impact than I expected. It's cool that people are putting in that effort with Snake Eyes, right? Like, oh, I found the best way to do this one card combo or whatever into the best possible end board. Yeah, cool story. But the reality is that whoever actually like plays the game first usually wins right now. You watch the high caliber Snake Eyes duels and it's always like, oh, well, hand trap here, hand trap there, skill drain here, skill drain there, cross out there. And whoever resolves their shit first, it doesn't really matter what kind of combos they're doing, right? They just win the game. Another thing that I would argue was also a huge miss on the last ban list is like, yes, the end boards got worse, but because it's a hand trap format, most of the time people don't start playing on turn 0 or turn 1, right? They hand trap back and forth until someone breaks through, and then you're not making an end board, right? I think the most realistic Snake Eye end board is the fact that they can put up 8,000 damage so easily with Zelantis, Raging Phoenix, Promethean Princess, right? That's the end board. You're playing back and forth until someone has the ability to put 2 or 3 bodies onto the field, and then that's what you do, right? Most of the feature matches in a Snake Eye mirror ended with that. And so the fact that like Baron and Savage were banned, they don't even matter for that. It's just the game ends because you attack for game. Taking end board pieces away doesn't matter when that's the dynamic. And I think that is ultimately the reason why the Baron and Savage ban didn't change that much about Snake Eye, because realistically, even during that format, we looked at those cards and we were like, technically it doesn't really matter if you play Jet Synchron, because if you get to this point, you win anyways. It's still good that they banned them, but they should have hit Snake Eyes.